I knew something shady was going on the second I saw the champagne-colored Lexus parked sideways across my driveway, not in front of it, across it, blocking both garage doors like I didn't live here. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that looks calm on the outside but is ruled by the most power-hungry, clipboard-wielding HOA on the planet. And at the center of the madness, Valerie Thompson. Middle-aged, loud-voiced, ruler of the HOA board and queen of the rules don't apply to me club, I'm Aidan Hartley. I'm a freelance CAD designer, work from home, don't bother anyone until someone bothers me. It started last Saturday. I'd just come back from grabbing breakfast, coffee in one hand, breakfast burrito in the other, when I saw the Lexus in my driveway. At first I thought maybe it was a delivery or someone got confused. But then I spotted another car, a black Jeep, partially parked on my lawn. Both of them had fake paper placards on the dash that said, HOA event permit approved. I dropped the burrito. I walked across the street toward the community clubhouse. That's when I saw Valerie, standing under a white pop-up tent, wearing a bright pink visor and barking orders into a walkie-talkie like she was running a military op. "Valerie," I called out. She turned slowly, like I'd just disrupted her royal court. "Oh, Aidan," she said, dragging out my name like it hurt her mouth. "Don't worry about the cars. I told my guests they could use your driveway for the garden brunch. We needed the street clear for the catering vans." "You what?" "You told them to park in my driveway." "Well," she said, looking annoyed, "you weren't using it. Besides, it's just for a few hours. We've done this before." "No, you've done this before. I've told you not to do this before." She waved me off like I was a fly. "This is for the HOA's benefit, Aidan. You should be more community-minded." I turned and walked back to my house, heart pounding. I wasn't going to fight her in the middle of her mimosa circus. I had a better idea. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus. He runs a towing company. He owes me a favor, actually, several. An hour later, 3 flatbeds pulled into the cul-de-sac. Valerie's guests were too busy sipping cucumber water to notice their cars being loaded up. But she saw. Oh, she saw. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, storming toward my driveway like it was a battlefield. "Having unauthorized vehicles removed from my private property," I said, holding up my deed, already printed out and highlighted. "Driveway's part of my parcel. Not HOA property. You can't just tow guests. They're here for an HOA-approved event." "Valerie," I said calmly, "you don't have the authority to assign people's driveways. You're not the queen of this neighborhood." Her face turned the color of her visor. "You'll be paying for this," she snapped. "Oh, I won't," I said. "But your guests will, and I'll be sending them the bills with pictures and timestamps." She started yelling at Marcus, but he just pointed to the private property sign I'd installed after the last time she pulled this stunt. The one she claimed was aesthetic pollution. I went back inside, locked my door, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The thud of tow trucks fading down the street was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months, and Valerie, she wasn't done, not even close. By Monday morning, the brunch incident had already made its rounds through the neighborhood gossip chain. I knew Valerie wouldn't let it go quietly, but I hadn't expected her next move to come in the form of a letter stuffed in my mailbox, one bearing the HOA's official letterhead and a ridiculous notice of non-compliance. According to it, I had violated community standards by initiating disruptive action during an HOA-sanctioned event, which, in Valerie's speak, meant I'd embarrassed her in front of her brunch guests. The notice was signed by the full board, though I'd bet good money half of them hadn't even read it before Valerie shoved a pen in their hands. The fine, $300, due within 10 days, I laughed out loud. Then I flipped the letter over and started jotting down notes. If Valerie wanted to escalate this, fine. She'd picked the wrong guy. First, I pulled up the HOA bylaws, which I downloaded 2 years ago after a similarly idiotic violation involving wind chimes. I still had the file bookmarked, color-coded, and annotated. There was no clause anywhere granting the HOA the power to authorize use of private property for events, and nothing about penalizing homeowners for removing trespassers. Second, I emailed the city zoning office. I'd learned something interesting after the last skirmish with Valerie. Our neighborhood was zoned as R1 residential, and under those guidelines, private driveways were considered part of the homeowner's lot, not shared community space. I requested an official statement to that effect and got a response that same afternoon. I printed it out and added it to my growing folder of evidence. Then I called my cousin Lena, who works in municipal code enforcement. When I explained what happened, she got quiet. "That's not just an HOA overreach," she said. "If they're issuing fines based on fabricated authority, that could qualify as fraudulent misrepresentation." "Can I get that in writing?" she laughed. "Give me an hour." By Tuesday, I had everything I needed: zoning confirmation, legal commentary from Lena, and a copy of the HOA's own bylaws highlighting every rule Valerie had twisted or outright ignored. I walked the folder over to the HOA office, a converted garage behind the clubhouse. Valerie was inside, alone, sipping from a stainless steel water bottle like she was preparing for a debate. As soon as she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Come to pay your fine?" she asked. "No," I said, placing the folder on the desk between us. "I came to give you a chance to withdraw it before this becomes a much bigger problem for you." She didn't even look at it. "You're not special, Aidan. The board voted. You disrupted a sanctioned event." "There was no quorum," I said, tapping the folder. "I checked the minutes. Only 2 board members were present when you drafted that letter. One of them is your sister-in-law, and the other was attending via speakerphone while on a beach in Cabo. That's not a quorum, Valerie." "It's a joke." She stood up, pushing her chair back so hard it knocked into the filing cabinet behind her. "You don't get to dictate how this community is run." "No," I said, "but the law does, and you've been ignoring it for years." She scoffed and reached for a form on her desk. "Keep this up, and I'll file a behavioral violation for harassment." "You go ahead and try," I said. "But I've already filed a complaint with the city's Neighborhood Services Department. They've opened an investigation into HOA practices, including this bogus fine. They'll be reaching out to you directly." Now she looked up. "You think some city clerk is going to scare me?" "No," I said. "But the fraud division of the county attorney's office might." She went quiet. I left the folder on her desk and walked out. By Thursday, the fallout had begun. A notice was posted on the HOA bulletin board, one Valerie hadn't signed. It stated that all fines issued in relation to the prior weekend's event were being suspended pending legal review. The language was stiff and sanitized, but the meaning was clear. Someone had gotten to the board and they were spooked. That afternoon, I got a visit from Jeremy, one of the board members who actually lived on my street. He was a quiet guy, mid-50s, retired engineer. He knocked once and stood awkwardly on the porch holding a manila envelope. "I wanted to say," he began, "I didn't know she was going to do that. The vote never happened. She just said it was handled." I took the envelope. Inside were meeting notes, email printouts, and a memo Valerie had sent claiming unanimous board approval for the fine 2 days before she even spoke to anyone. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I'm tired of her running this place like it's her kingdom," he said. "And you're the only one who's ever stood up to her and made it stick." That night, I started drafting a formal complaint to the state's HOA regulatory board. With Jeremy's documents and Lena's analysis, I had more than enough to trigger a compliance audit. I wasn't just going to beat the fine, I was going to shine a spotlight on every backroom decision Valerie had ever made. The next week, a city compliance officer showed up at the clubhouse with a clipboard and a badge. He didn't knock. He just walked in and started asking questions. I watched from my porch as Valerie trailed behind him, her face pale, her hands fluttering like she was trying to rearrange the air. 2 days later, I got another letter. This one wasn't on HOA letterhead. It was from the city's legal department. informing me that the HOA had been cited for 3 separate violations: unauthorized enforcement actions, misuse of association funds for personal events, and failure to document board decisions in accordance with municipal code. Each violation carried a fine of up to $5,000. And the kicker: the city was requiring a full member vote on whether Valerie should remain on the board. The vote was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening. In the meantime, I installed a motion-activated camera above my garage, just in case anyone got any bright ideas. I also sent an anonymous email to a few neighbors with copies of the zoning documents and a link to the city's complaint form, in case anyone else wanted to share their grievances. They did. By the time the meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was standing room only. Valerie stood at the front, still trying to maintain control, but this time no one was listening. People brought printouts. They brought screenshots. One guy even brought a flash drive full of audio recordings from past meetings where Valerie had unilaterally declared decisions before any votes had occurred. When it came time to vote, the ballots were counted by 2 residents and a city liaison. The result: 92% voted to remove her from the board. She didn't say a word as she left. Just grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and pushed through the crowd like it wasn't even there. Jeremy was voted interim president. He's not flashy, but he reads the rules, and more importantly, he applies them fairly. A week after the vote, I got a handwritten note in my mailbox. It read, "Thanks for the courage. I owe you a driveway beer sometime. Jay, I kept it, and I never saw that champagne Lexus in my driveway again." Friday morning started with a knock, not the usual kind. This one came with authority. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, one holding a clipboard, the other scanning the front of my house as if memorizing its layout. The taller one spoke first. "Mr. Hartley?" "Yeah," I said, stepping outside. "Something wrong? We're following up on a report of vehicle tampering and harassment filed last weekend." I blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." The officer held up the report. "Multiple complaints, all tied to an HOA event. Says you arranged unauthorized towing of guests' vehicles." I crossed my arms. "I have documentation proving the vehicles were parked on my private property without permission. I also have a signed towing agreement and video of the entire process." "You want to come in and see it?" The officers exchanged a look. The shorter one nodded. "That would help." Inside, I pulled up the footage from the driveway camera. Valerie's guests could be seen pulling in, some even stepping across my flower beds to get to the event. Then the tow trucks arrived, slow and methodical. No yelling, no threats, no damage. I handed them the zoning letter and the parcel map showing the driveway clearly within my property line. Both officers read it carefully, flipping pages and muttering to themselves. Eventually, the taller one shook his head. "This looks clean, but you should know filing a false police report carries consequences. If you're telling the truth, this could bounce back on whoever submitted the complaint." "Oh, I'm counting on it," I said. They left without taking anything, but I made copies of everything anyway and dropped them off at the precinct that afternoon, just to be sure. Valerie had tried to escalate things into criminal territory. That wasn't negligence, that was malicious intent. I didn't have to wait long for fallout. The following Tuesday, I was contacted by a detective from the Property Crimes Division. She asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement regarding the HOA's conduct and the falsified report. Apparently, I wasn't the only one they'd targeted. A retired couple 3 houses down had been fined for unauthorized landscaping after they planted drought-resistant shrubs. Another neighbor, a single mother of 2, had been fined for excessive driveway use. These weren't just overreaches, they were patterns. "What exactly are you investigating?" I asked. The detective's voice was measured. "We believe members of the HOA board, including the former president, may have been using their authority to target residents unfairly, collect illegitimate fines, and possibly misappropriate funds. We've opened a case file. I agreed to cooperate in full. That weekend, I met with Jeremy and 3 other homeowners at the community library. None of them had spoken much before, but now they were all leaning in, voices low and serious. One of them, a nurse named Danielle, had brought a spreadsheet of every fine issued in the last 2 years. She'd been quietly tracking them ever since she received a notice for unauthorized window tinting on her second-floor bedroom. The data was damning. Fines were disproportionately issued to newer residents and people who had questioned board decisions. Even worse, some of the payments had been redirected to a separate account under the name Community Beautification Fund, an account that wasn't listed in any of the publicly available HOA budgets. "Guess who was the only one with access to that account?" Danielle asked, sliding a printed email across the table. It was from Valerie's personal Gmail, addressed to a former treasurer who'd resigned abruptly last spring. The email instructed the treasurer to keep the beautification fund off the books to avoid city interference. Jeremy leaned back, lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to take this to the city attorney." "I already did," I said. "But now we've got enough to involve the state's financial crimes unit." The group went silent for a moment, then Danielle nodded. "I'll testify if it comes to that." We spent the next 2 hours organizing everything into a secure drive, labeled and indexed. Jeremy took the lead on contacting the city's legal department, while I forwarded our findings to the detective. Within 48 hours, the investigation escalated. A subpoena was issued for the HOA's financial records. Valerie was served in front of her house by a plainclothes officer. She tried to slam the door, but the officer stepped forward and handed her the envelope before she could vanish inside. By midweek, the audit team arrived. They weren't HOA members or city clerks, they were from the state's Department of Regulatory Oversight. They brought laptops, scanners, and a quiet intensity that made everyone nervous. For the first time in years, the HOA office sat empty and silent, its windows dark. Then came the arrests. 2 board members, Valerie's sister-in-law and the former treasurer, were taken into custody for obstruction and falsifying financial records. Valerie herself wasn't arrested yet, but she was officially named in the investigation, and her assets were frozen pending a forensic audit. Her Lexus, towed. This time, by order of the state, the neighborhood changed overnight. People who'd kept their heads down for years began to speak up. Residents who'd been fined or intimidated came forward with statements and receipts. One man even brought out a hidden camera he'd installed in his garage after receiving multiple citations for tool noise. The footage showed Valerie peeking into his backyard with a flashlight at 2 in the morning, jotting notes into a spiral-bound notebook. A public meeting was held at the community center the following Friday. The city assigned a temporary administrator to oversee the HOA until a new board could be fairly elected. I didn't plan on running, but Jeremy did, and so did Danielle. Neither of them gave speeches. They didn't have to. Everyone already knew what they'd done. The administrator opened the floor to community concerns. For the first time, people weren't afraid. One after another, neighbors stood and told their stories. Not just about fines, but about petty retaliations, vague threats, and years of being made to feel like outsiders in their own homes. Then someone asked to speak last. It was the woman who owned the black Jeep that had been towed during the brunch fiasco. She looked nervous, clutching a folded paper in her hand. "I didn't know my car was parked illegally," she said. "Valerie told us she'd gotten permission for overflow parking, said it was arranged. When I called the number on the towing receipt, the guy said it was private property." I didn't believe him, not at first, but then I checked the maps. She held up the paper. "She lied to all of us, and I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner." No one jeered. No one rolled their eyes. She was just another neighbor who'd been manipulated. A few people even clapped. After the meeting, I walked back to my house, the evening air calm for once. No clipboard patrols, no mystery fines, just porch lights and quiet conversations. A few days later, I got a letter from the state's regulatory board thanking me for my role in exposing the misconduct. The HOA would be placed under provisional oversight, and a third-party firm would handle its finances until the next election cycle. One final envelope arrived that week. Inside was a check, reimbursing me for legal expenses and the towing cost I'd fronted. Attached was a note from the temporary administrator. It read, "Thank you for reminding this neighborhood what accountability looks like." I stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench, not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted to remember the exact day the neighborhood stopped being Valerie's kingdom and started belonging to its people again. 2 weeks after the meeting that dethroned Valerie, life had returned to something resembling normal, but not for long. A quiet buzz still lingered under the surface of the neighborhood, a kind of cautious anticipation. People watered their lawns with one eye on the street. The mailboxes seemed to be checked with a touch more curiosity. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. I found out what it was when I received a knock, not the firm kind of a city official, not the casual tap of a neighbor, but the hard, deliberate knock of someone who expected resistance. I opened the door to find a man in a gray suit, early 40s, badge clipped to his belt and a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. "Aidan Hartley," I nodded. "Detective Aaron Voss, County Financial Crimes Unit." "May I come in?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stepped inside like he already had the legal right. He opened the folder as he walked toward the kitchen. "We've been digging into the HOA's financials since the audit began. The preliminary findings were bad. The deeper we go, the uglier it gets." I gestured to a chair. "What are we talking about? Shell accounts, fake contractor invoices, a non-existent landscaping service that's been paid more than $25,000 over the last year. The payments were routed through a checking account under the name V. Thompson Beautification LLC, registered out of a P.O. box in Arizona." I looked at him, stunned. She created a fake company using her own name. People like her never expect to get caught. "Right now, we're working with the state attorney's office to prepare charges. Money laundering, wire fraud, mail fraud, and misuse of public funds. She could be looking at 15 years. A moment passed before I said, "She's still in the neighborhood, you know. Still walking her dog like nothing's happened." "She won't be for long," Voss said. "We're coordinating with the marshals to serve a federal warrant. We just needed to confirm a few more things. Your name's come up more than once." I raised an eyebrow. "She listed you directly in internal. Emails said you were obstructing HOA operations. That actually worked in our favor. Proves she saw the HOA as a personal enterprise, not a regulatory body." He stood and closed the folder. "You'll probably be subpoenaed as a witness. Grand jury's being assembled next week." He left without asking for coffee or small talk. I watched him disappear down the street, the weight of what he said settling deep into my gut. This wasn't just about fines or petty rules anymore. This was a federal case. Later that evening, Jeremy stopped by. He looked tired, but determined. He handed me a copied letter from the interim administrator. The HOA's bank account had been frozen. A forensic accountant was now assigned to handle disbursements. All future repairs, maintenance, or community expenses had to go through city approval. "You should see the garbage they left behind," Jeremy said. "Boxes of receipts for things like decorative gravel and emergency pressure washing. Half of it never happened." I leaned against the porch rail. "Pressure washing of the clubhouse roof in January during a freeze warning." We both shook our heads. The next day, a moving truck appeared in front of Valerie's house. Not the kind with logos, but a plain white box truck with tinted windows. 2 men loaded boxes quickly, barely making eye contact. I watched from my upstairs window as Valerie exited her front door, small rolling suitcase in hand, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She didn't look up. She didn't knock on any doors. She just climbed into a silver sedan that had been idling at the curb. The car pulled away slowly, made a sudden left at the stop sign, and vanished. By noon, her house was posted for sale, an ugly, hastily printed sign jammed into the lawn, advertising as his motivated seller. 3 days later, the arrest hit the local news. Valerie Thompson had been taken into custody outside a bank in Glendale, Arizona, where she'd attempted to withdraw $11,000 in cash using an ID flagged during the fraud investigation. The footage showed her being led away in a navy blue windbreaker, cuffs on, lips pressed tight. No camera flashing grin, no fake smile for the press. The charges were worse than anyone expected. In addition to financial crimes, investigators had discovered that Valerie had falsely submitted grant applications to the state under the HOA's name. She'd claimed the neighborhood was a low-income redevelopment zone, using doctored census data to collect more than $40,000 in revitalization funds money that never made it past her personal checking account. The news anchor called it one of the most flagrant abuses of HOA power in county history. The next HOA meeting, now fully open to the public and run by Jeremy, had to be relocated to the community high school gymnasium. More than 200 people showed up, including reporters and 2 representatives from the State Housing Accountability Office. Danielle stood at the podium and read a prepared statement. She was brief, but firm. "We're not here to settle scores. We're here to make sure this never happens again." Then she introduced the new charter. The revised HOA bylaws stripped the board of unilateral enforcement power. All future rule changes required a 2/3 majority from residents. Fines were capped, required documentation, and had to be reviewed by an independent ombudsman. No more secret votes. No more backdoor meetings. The final motion of the night was to rename the HOA itself. No one wanted anything associated with Valerie to linger, not even an abbreviation. They voted to dissolve the existing entity and reform under a new name, Hillside Commons Neighborhood Association. The transition would be overseen by the same administrator who had helped clean up the financial mess. The city had pledged to match future funds for community improvements, provided all expenditures were documented and approved in public. As the meeting ended, people mingled in the gymnasium. Someone brought cookies. A group of teenagers played impromptu basketball on the far end of the court. It was the most alive the neighborhood had felt in years. I stood near the bleachers when a man I didn't recognize approached me. Late 30s with a camera bag slung over one shoulder. "You're Aidan, right? I'm with the local paper, been following your story." I nodded. "Mind if I ask what made you fight back? Most people just pay the fine and keep their head down." I paused. "Because it wasn't just about a driveway," I said. "It was about someone thinking they owned us. And I don't do well with people who think they can take what's mine and walk away like it's nothing." He gave a slow, respectful nod and walked off. That night, I stood on my porch, a beer in hand, watching the street I'd nearly lost to arrogance and fraud. Lawn chairs sat outside again. Porch lights flickered on without fear of being cited for excess illumination. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalks, laughter bouncing off the fences. The camera above my garage still worked, but I hadn't checked the footage in days. No one had parked in my driveway, no one had dared.